Okay. Well, thank you all for joining us this afternoon. Welcome to WPN members who are joining us. This is a webinar that we've put on based on requests from WPN members, so thank you for sending your ideas over. The topic of today's webinar is remote coaching tips. And we know that right now with schools moving to online learning and just services moving to remote settings, that this topic has come up a lot about how do I provide remote advising, coaching, just support to the students and young people that you're serving. So I feel like this is pretty timely. Okay, so welcome again. My name's Donna Quach. I'm with the College Success Foundation and the Washington Passport Network. My role here today is to serve as the webinar monitor, and I'll help field questions and move us along throughout this webinar. Just some housekeeping things to keep in mind. If you have a question, this webinar is for you. We want you to ask questions and engage with the panelists. So feel free to enter your questions into the chat box or the Q&A pan box, and my team member and I will be fielding questions over to the panelists throughout this webinar. Again, this webinar is recorded, so and the PowerPoint will be shared, so we will upload the recording of this webinar onto our WPN YouTube channel, as well as sharing it on the Washington Passport Network website. And our goal is to get that up by the end of this week for all of you and to share out with folks who weren't able to join us today. In terms of today's agenda and how we plan on sharing information, so we're going to start off with an introduction with the panelists. We have 4 panelists today who will answer some of the questions that you have, and then one more CSF staff that will provide information about CSF's coaching method and our approach to remote coaching. Then I will support with the facilitation of the conversation. So we have 4 questions that we have asked the panelists to respond to. And then we do have some resources that we want to share out with all of you, and also keep this as an opportunity, or leave this as an opportunity for you all to share resources that you know of. Feel free to put that in the chat box as well, and we can share that out with people after the webinar. And then we have some time left at the end. We're allocated some time for questions, and that'll be an opportunity to, if we can, get through all of the questions asked, and if not, we will answer those questions in a blog at a later time. Okay, so I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves, and then we'll transition over after.
My name is first on the list, so I'll jump in. My name is Robbie Lang. I'm a program manager with College Success Foundation, and have been doing remote coaching work with students this academic year. We started this out last year, but it's only been this year so far that we've actually really been doing like virtual coaching sessions. I work with students at Central, Washington University, and Western.
Hi everyone, my name is Rosalind Guillen, and I'm also a program officer for Remote College Services. I am coaching approximately 251 students, all at UW Seattle, in a remote setting, and I hopped over to this new role from another role in CSF at the end of October, so I've been doing remote coaching since November of this academic year.
Hi everyone, my name is Arlisha Etienne and I am a CSF coach. I coach about 80 students in person and remote from UW Tacoma.
Hi there, my name is Denise Smith and I am the CSF coach at Eastern, and we've just dropped down to 100. We lost a few, so I'm coaching 100 students in person and remote, but mostly in person, and I've been with CSF going on almost 2 years now.
Thank you to the panelists and CSF staff for joining us and sharing just your lessons learned and you have learned along the way with supporting students remotely? So, oh, Victor, go ahead.
I was going to introduce myself. So I'm Victor Zamora, and I work on the back end of the College Success Foundation's coaching model. And so I support all of our coaches and help build some the context. And so what I wanted to talk a little bit about was just give everybody kind of a platform of where we're at CSF with this, and then let the coaches really do their job of telling you how they're working with students. At CSF, we have two different approaches for coaching. We have our remote and in-person models. Meaning that at 2 campuses, we have coaches who work on campus, and then at 3 campuses, we have coaches who work remotely from our central office in Bellevue. And of course, now during this time, all of our coaches are now remote. And so I'm excited to actually have our Eastern and UW coach, Alicia and Denise, share kind of their learnings. I did want to focus that our coaching method really focuses on 4 areas. One is community building. The second is skill building. The third is timely communication. And the fourth is a career interested focus. So our program is really built on these 4 pillars, and everything that we do as far from our coaching to our activities with our students and to what we communicate is all based around these 4 pillars. And so for all of our students who are in our program, they receive some sort of service that impacts one of these focus areas. And of course, this has now changed a little bit because we're all gone online. And so the model looks a little differently, but the focus still remains the same in those areas. And I think the big part is the approach that we take. So we take the 7 life domains approach, which is based out of the Fostering Success coaching model, which is based out of Western Michigan. We really use this approach to help our students understand the work that we're doing. And so if those who aren't familiar with this model, there are 7 life domains that it's based off of. And so we use these 7 life domains to really drive our work that we do with our students, but also more importantly, how we coach our students. So while these domains impact our focus areas, our coaches really take this approach when they start to meet with students and when they've met with students. And so our conversations are really based around those 7 life domains with an attention to the focus areas. And then of course, the attention to how that service delivery is happening. So that's kind of how our approach and method and how we look at the work. But now let's really find out how they actually work from the experts on our teams, which are our 4 coaches.
Thanks, Victor. Okay, so just to kind of frame the conversation and to reground folks, we did ask all of you to submit responses to some of the questions that we asked during the registration, and thank you for doing that. That was super helpful for the panelists in thinking through what questions we should be answering to. So the 4 questions that we asked all of you are, what challenges are you encountering now to support students, knowing that, things have shifted in the ways that, if you were supporting students in person, now doing that remotely or virtually. Second question is, what challenges are you hearing from students? We know that some of you have already conducted surveys and just anecdotally received, stories, and just hearing from students what has been most challenging or still is challenging for them. We also asked you, what questions do you have about how to conduct your work in a remote setting? We heard things like missing your computer and office supplies and just things like that. And so we have, some of the coaches will talk about how they've been able to set up their own space in a remote setting that hopefully will be a bit helpful to share for you to know. And then the last question we asked is, at the end of this webinar, what's one takeaway? And we kind of left that open-ended because this webinar is for you. We hopefully, we designed the questions around things that you've brought up and themes that we've kind of pulled out from your responses. So from those questions that we asked you, we developed and created 4 questions to respond to these. And then what we'll do next is, there's 4 panelists, and we have, because there's 4 questions, and just for the sake of time, the panelists have selected 2 questions that they'll be responding to for each of them. And then again, after, if you have any questions as you're hearing their responses and just things that they're sharing, please feel free to put your question in the chat box. So the first question that we have is for the panelists, is please share strategies you have used to connect with students remotely. What have you found most effective, and how do you check in and have meetings with students you're working with? And then I'm gonna call on Denise first to answer this question.
Okay, we'll get it started here. Yeah, it's definitely been a little bit of a shift. I previously did do a little bit of remote coaching, but a lot of it was in person. So one change that I have made is I'm doing a lot more phone calls, which I usually kind of avoided before because students don't answer their phones usually, but I found they are answering more. And so that's been really effective. And I'm doing a lot more follow-up correspondence, just a lot more like text and email outreach. And I try to make it a little more individual instead of sending bulk or group texts or emails. I'm really spending the time to make them more individualized. And I found that, you know, typically I think I get a better response rate, which makes sense. I mean, wouldn't we all? So since I have time to do more of that, I have been doing more of that. I've also tried to, I have tried to be more direct with students when I do get them via text or email and I want to meet with them via video. I'll be like, okay, I'm going to put you down on my calendar for 2 o'clock on Thursday, instead of relying on them as much to like, okay, we'll use my appointment link and schedule an appointment. So I just feel like that being a little more directive in that way has helped too. Let's see, what else am I missing here? I think I've been averaging about 5 coaching appointments a week. And I would say like 7 to 10, like what we consider engagements where it's not a full coaching appointment, but something meaningful has happened and been exchanged between coach and student. So I'm not sure what else to add at this point, unless I missed something.
Thanks, Denise. I'll turn it over to Rosalind.
Thanks, Donna. So I'll set the scene a little bit just to give everyone some context. As I said in my intro, I switched over to this remote coaching role from another role at CSF in late October. And so I was already planning to be a remote coach. And so the pandemic didn't switch that whole thing for me, but I did learn some strategies just from moving into a new role for how to engage students remotely, because before I was in pre-college services and I met with students face-to-face, and so the remote thing wasn't really a skill that I had experienced or built before I moved into this role. And so in order to frame that, as part of my training, I talked with Kristen Taylor, who is a consultant coach that we all have, who helps us kind of work on our strategy, our competence, and our morale surrounding our positions. And she was incredibly helpful. And she helped me because at first, so like say November, December, I was feeling like very few students were reaching out. And of course, I didn't have a relationship with any of the students on my caseload at that point. And so it was more like introducing myself, sending bulk emails, trying to get them to schedule appointments to meet with me. And I had very, very low response rate. And so I was feeling like I needed to make a change. And so in talking with Kristen, she helped me really pinpoint some things. And so some of the things I'm going to tell you are things that I learned from her. So I want to make sure that I give her credit. And she was going to join us today as a panelist, but she had a sudden death in the family last night. And so obviously that was unexpected. And so she asked me to please apologize for not being present. And so I'll just make sure that I give her credit for the things that she helped me come up with. And so after having that problem of not having students engaged, we went to the drawing board and she helped me sort of call all these like specific points to try to build a strategy for engaging. And it did work. I had really good results. So the first thing that her and I talked about was authenticity. It's hard to portray that when you're sending mass emails that are informative, or even just with a headshot of myself, introducing myself. And so she said, she asked me several questions about my story and why, why I do this, where my passion lies with students. And obviously I come from an area where I'm passionate about the work I do. And she said, so you need to share that with students so that you can start connecting. And so I started sending emails, and when I answer the last question and show you specifically some of those things, I'll show you some examples, but that was the first part, was authenticity, and using specific language to connect with students instead of just being general and broad. And she called it the language of communication. Also in the email communications, asking some open-ended questions to sort of create the opportunity for them to want to engage. And obviously in those communications, making it really easy for them to be able to sign up for an appointment if they wanted to. So when I switched that, I went from maybe 1 to 3 students making an appointment to, like, within 2 hours of sending that first email, I had like 10 students that had already made appointments to like chat with me, which like really blew me away. So the second thing was intention. So setting an intention for what I wanted to do. And part of that was in the engagements, really listening to what students were saying, and writing down things that were important to them so that I could then circle back and use those things to engage with them at a later date. So for example, if they were looking forward to a certain thing, a trip or some kind of milestone coming up, really being intentional about writing that down and calendaring it for myself to reach back out and say, hey, how did that thing go? Because again, I was trying to build a relationship, and doing it remotely, presents a little bit of a challenge when you're not face to face. And so that worked out really well. The other thing was always at the conclusion or towards the conclusion of my coaching session, making sure that we talked about next steps. So whatever goals we had talked about that they identified they wanted to work on, recapping sort of next steps, and then setting a time limit for when we were going to check in again. So if it was going to be within a week or within 2 weeks or maybe the beginning of the next quarter, it all depends on the student needs, but really being intentional about setting those metrics. And so also, again, using my calendar to make sure that if the student wasn't on my calendar within the week or the 2 weeks that we agreed we would talk, reaching out to them and encouraging them to make an appointment, or saying, hey, I'm free this day. So that was another tactic. Then the third thing that Kristen named that we concentrated on was connection. And that meant like humanizing why I care and why they should care to connect. So communicating a value added for a coach. So perhaps at times some of my communications would have just a little blurb about, studies show that students who access coaching while they're in higher ed, have X amount of percentage of more success or stay more engaged. So kind of peppering some of my communication with that to humanize why it's important to have that connection. Also sharing things about myself, which is part of the authenticity, but sharing things about myself that they would be able to relate with. So I remember as a college student feeling like an imposter, and I mentioned that in one of my emails just because I was the first in my family and first generation. Nobody in my family had been to college, and I felt out of place, like I didn't belong. And so I shared a little blurb about that. And then other communications, just kind of throwing it out there. Would you like to know how long it took me to pick a major? Because guess what? It took me several years to figure out what I wanted to do. So those are all things that the students that I serve at least would be able to connect with, and that has generated a lot of engagement as well. And then during our coaching sessions, also, appropriately sharing, obviously not oversharing, but some situations that would resonate with them based on what were things that they wanted to discuss, and even anonymously sharing situations of other students that are similar, because that helps them feel like they're not alone, and it normalizes the struggles that they're having, and that also tends to build a connection with them where Now, pretty much every student that I've had coaching sessions with are naturally reaching back out and setting up coaching sessions for later. And we've had multiple coaching sessions. And so that has been super rewarding, because at first I was pretty much just sending an email and it was crickets, and I would just wait for them to reach out. And then in between those coaching sessions, another strategy that I use is pick up the phone and I call. So like Denise said, I also had kind of a biased outlook to that. I thought, oh, they're never going to answer the phone, because I had worked with pre-college students who hate the phone. They won't answer the phone if they don't know who's calling. But the college students, I was surprised. I would call, they would answer, and we'd naturally kind of progress into an impromptu coaching session. And so that has really been effective as well to reach a larger number of students. So yeah.
Thank you, Denise and Roslyn. That was super helpful with just all the little nuggets and strategies that you shared. So moving on to the next question. Many students are still struggling with online learning. For students who have limited access to technology, what tools have you used to engage with them? And second part is, have you provided any technological training for students who have access to technology but may not be sure of how to use those equipments? And then I have here, first up is Arlisha.
So I've used Zoom, Google Hangouts, and just phone calls and texting with my students. One thing that I found helpful was making sure that whatever tool that I'm using to connect with my students is something that they are already familiar with. So that way I'm avoiding the additional barrier of having to provide technological training. Most of my students are at UW-Tacoma are using Zoom with their classes already. And so I have gotten into the habit of asking my students what method for communication they prefer. Some students are a little bit shy to be on camera with video chatting is what I've noticed, but using the link that gives them an option to call or video chat is usually helpful. And so my approach, because technology is limited, is just to avoid complexity and use what our students are already using, which for my campus is Zoom.
Thanks, Arlisha. This is Robbie Lang again. So there was a couple kind of different pieces to this question, like adjusting to online learning and then like providing assistance for the tools that they're using. So I think for the adjustment to the online learning piece and students having all online classes now, like the access to the technology itself has been really big. It's access, and then from there, it's from what I've seen, it's mostly just working with students around time management, because so much of it can be self-paced. So in terms of the access piece, I've worked with a number of students who have been doing all of their assignments on their phone. Everything, readings, papers, watching lectures. They're trying to make it work, but it's really not ideal. And so I think when that when that comes up or when that's noticed, just talking with them about like what access to other like technology they might have, if on campus, if they don't own a laptop, maybe they can use the computer lab or check out a rental. But at home, maybe that's not an option, or there's not enough computers to go around, or Wi-Fi at home is not great. So there's all these like technology pieces that are really important with adjusting to online learning and making that even possible. So I think that's the first thing to just kind of like explore with students when there are barriers, and then also but help alleviate those barriers. Colleges, some colleges are starting laptop loaner programs even remotely, as well as affordable, there's affordable internet sources and whatnot. So I think like that's just a big thing. CSF, we have a small pool of funds dedicated for the emergency fund request. So if a student is really needing a laptop, we can potentially utilize those funds to help with that, or something else. And it's just for students who are CSF scholarship recipients or achievers in high school, because the pool of funds are pretty low for it. So the other thing there I was going to mention is just the time management piece, with this like adjustment to online classes. I don't know if other folks have noticed this in their work with students right now, but just with the shift from everything being like from on-campus classroom, meeting 2 to 3 times a week, to now
Did we lose Robbie? I think we might have lost. Robbie, are you still there?
that is for the most part what it is, where students really have to hold themselves accountable in a number of ways, just to getting the assignments done, turning things in on time, and also just
Hey, I can help you. I came by earlier. I got a new tube. Yep. And then as we put it in, somewhere you'll see it's.
Sorry, one second. I think there's some background noise happening.
Oh, the ripped tire?
Sorry, one second. I think
The other Washington Passport Network one doesn't look like it's muted. I think it might be.
okay.
I think it's so
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, I'm just highlighting kind of what I've seen recently in this adjustment, this piece, adjusting to online learning, the challenges. So just working with students on their time management practices. I mean, procrastination, it's a very normal thing. Pretty much every human deals with it at some level. So when you make this change, it's normal that students are dealing with that, and just talking with them about how to really stay on track, spread assignments out so that you're not doing everything last minute. And I, personally, I haven't had to do any training with students on the technology pieces. They know that all really well. And like Arlisha said, using tools that they're already familiar with is nice. Helps with that. But I haven't encountered any times where I've really needed to do a lot of training with students on the technology pieces. It's kind of the other pieces that I mentioned.
Thanks, Robbie. I'll just add quickly, Robbie shared about the College Success Foundation Emergency Fund requests, and we've shared this with WPN members, but just as a reminder, Passport at CSF Passport team, we also have a pool of funds called the Passport Scholar Success Fund. That is, at this time, emergency fund for students. So if you know of any Passport eligible students who is in need of a laptop or other support paying for rent or things like that, we're also here as a resource, and that can be found on our WashingtonPassportNetwork.org website, which I'll talk about at the very end of this presentation. And then let's go on to the next question. So next question is, what have you found helpful to support the mental wellness of students in a remote setting? And first I have here is Denise.
Okay, hi again. This is more important now than ever, I think. When meeting with a student, when I'm able to have more of a conversation either on the phone or video, I really kind of kick the meeting off like informally, hey, how are you doing with all this? Isn't this kind of crazy? Just kind of getting the temperature of kind of where they're at with everything before we even really dig into anything else. And I've been really trying to relate man, yeah, I'm in front of the computer all day, and we're all just kind of adjusting. So sort of trying to normalize the abnormal right now. And so I think that just kind of gets that out of the way. And then it also sort of triggers or flags some things that I may want to come back around and check in on as we are coaching and as they are opening up and sharing. So that's one thing that I have been doing. I've been checking in a lot on self-care, just even if they're not bringing it up, just even before, we're almost done with the coaching, hey, what are you doing for stress relief? Are you getting out and going for a walk? Just kind of throwing in that at least at the end, even if I'm not really coaching around that, but just a little plug for the self-care. When we do kind of get into it, I am checking a lot on like, how's your family handling this? Like, how are you doing having like moved back home? Like, you know, you were on campus, now you're back at home. Like, what is that looking like? So maybe asking questions that they may not realize, you know, has been a big adjustment. You know, like, I had one gal like, yeah, my parents hate that all of us are back home. Like, it kind of sucks. And we're not fighting, but you know, it's not very fun around here. So just kind of like addressing those things that maybe nobody would think about. I've also just been like, you know, I have some regulars, and so I'll just send a quick text like, hey, how you doing today? I was just thinking about you. Just like little thoughtful quick messages, just so that they know that they're not alone and somebody is thinking about them. So those are some of the strategies that I've used. Also checking on students who are still living on campus, because they are having a totally different experience than they had been having. And it's a ghost town, and you know, it's feeling weird for them. So yeah, just sort of that mental health domain, I think. Those are sort of my main things I kind of poke at in the coaching.
Thanks, Denise. Nisha?
So 2 things that I will say is that I have tried to maintain whatever services and resources that I was providing on campus in a remote way. And so one way that I've done that was trying to promote community building virtually amongst my students. And so it's a little bit challenging because students have a lot that's coming in via email, and so it can get lost. So that's just a side note. But trying to find ways to build community virtually, since that was something that was already being offered on campus, just so that students can have this sense of normalcy. It really helps with promoting mental wellness, especially because our students are lacking community in general, and they're so used to having that community on campus. And so trying to find a way to provide that virtually, if you have the capacity, is one way that I've been able to promote mental wellness. Another thing that I've been doing is making sure that I'm celebrating my students' small victories. So when a student gets accepted into a major, or if it's their birthday, especially if it's their birthday, since they probably won't be able to gather with friends and family like normal, making sure that I'm acknowledging that and celebrating those victories and finding ways to be creative, whether that's sending them a note in the mail or sending them a text, but just making sure that I'm sending those little praises to my students as often as I can, because I know I've received that during this time from my friends and family, and so providing that for my students.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to the last question that we have for the panelists. Are there any additional remote coaching tips that you'd like to share with the webinar attendees today? And I'll start with Robbie.
So making it as easy as possible for your students to meet with you has been really important come to light. So I'm not sure what access to different kind of tools folks have. Something that our team, College Success Foundation, uses is Setmore. It links with your calendar, and you can share a personal link out with anybody, and they can book an open appointment like time with you. Like it'll just show, here's, you know, my open appointment slots, and they can just pick something that works for them. So it's pretty affordable. Google appointment slots is another good option. So, you know, it's not going to work for every student, but depending on like your caseload, it might actually be really helpful to have something like that, you know, that you can share out with kind of in bulk with students. Just the other day, I did this, and it doesn't always happen like this, but you know, I sent out just kind of a reminder text to everybody at like 4 o'clock that I hadn't met with, and by 5 o'clock I had 10 new appointments scheduled, just because it made it really easy. So little successes like that are really like encouraging in this. I mean, otherwise you spend a lot of time going back and forth with students, which isn't all bad, but you're just trying to find a time that works and you're not really getting into what's going on with them. So it increases your capacity. There is a cost. I think I saw a comment. There is a cost for Setmore. It's $25 a month. They have different plans. It's a little bit cheaper if you pay for a whole year, and it's just one option. It's something that we've been using.
Thanks, Robbie. Rosalind, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thanks, Donna. And yeah, I would echo everything that Robbie said. And I guess to circle back and kind of tie it all up, and this is a term that Kristen Taylor came up with, and she called it the tapestry of outreach. So like not one way is one size fits all, and it's also not holistic and complete. And so a combination of email and text outreach, like everyone has said, like the birthday thing is a great example of that. You can do that by text easily to reach out to a student, and it really makes them feel visible to you. And I think that that's really important to continue to build those connections, especially now in this time where, you know, everyone is so isolated. And so a combination of text and email outreach, but then another component is like unscheduled calls. And so the way that my workflow goes is I'll look at my calendar during the week and see where students have self-scheduled in. I'll do some outreach emails, and sometimes they're to a whole group, but sometimes they're maybe just to my freshmen, depending on the time of the quarter, like midterms are coming or things like that. Or now to my seniors that are, you know, really feeling a sense of loss about graduate commencements being canceled, and, you know, just like uncertainty about the job outlook, that kind of thing. And so I will target in bulk, but to some groups. And then in between those times, I'll see where I have kind of dead areas in my calendar, and I will physically schedule time to just make calls. So go down the list, whoever I haven't talked to in a while, or students that I've never talked to, I always make sure I try to continue to reach out to see if they'll answer the phone. And then, like I said before, engage in those kind of impromptu coaching sessions with them. And then part of the tapestry of outreach is to set some goals and metrics for myself as well. And so through the coaching that I did with Kristen, she was like, okay, so like what kind of numbers, what do you think would be realistic as far as coaching sessions per week and the outreach calls, so the unscheduled calls. And so I set a goal, and I set them in a range, so like a high and a low and a high for each thing. And so initially my range for making the unscheduled calls was a minimum of 75 and a maximum of 115 calls per week, just because I have a really large caseload of students. And at that time when I was setting the strategy, you know, I hadn't connected with a whole lot of them. And so now that range is probably less, because now I've talked to most of the students, and now naturally they're appearing on my calendar, or something is scheduled for me to reach out to them. And so I do need to modify that at this point, but initially that's what it was: 75 on the high end, 115 on the low. And some weeks I didn't meet that, but I noticed that my coaching sessions, so my range for coaching was between 19 and 32 per week. And so on the weeks that I was closer to the high end of the range, maybe 30, 31, I noticed that my calls were less, but that was because I was actually engaging with some students that answered the phone, and I was able to get more coaching sessions in. I've never had 19 coaching sessions where they have all been student directed, or that students have scheduled themselves in. So it's a combination of students scheduling themselves in and then picking up those impromptu coaching sessions by calling or by sending a text, and then the student is like, hey, do you have time to talk? And then we'll connect that way. So like I said, tapestry of outreach, I thought it was a really good way of like visualizing what that looks like. And then I just wanted to share some of the initial outreach emails that I sent at the beginning that were successful for me. And I'll tell you that the picture thing was way out of my comfort zone. I probably like perseverated over choosing a picture for like I don't know, longer than I should have. I think I even sent to my supervisor, like, these are the pictures. I don't know which one to pick because I just felt super vulnerable. The pizza thing was an idea that Kristen had. That was the first outreach email that I sent. As I said at the beginning, that got super quick results, like within 2 hours. You know, I had 10 students that had signed up for that week, and then I continued to trickle on. And so I had a lot of students reach out on that first one. And obviously, as the weeks go by and the more students I contact, the less those outreach emails garner contact, but I keep picking up more, you know, more students that I hadn't reached. And so it's positive. And so I shared some things about myself in that email. And I've also been tracking like what time of the quarter I've sent these emails. So to see, kind of compare, sometimes are better than others. Obviously during finals week, I'm not going to be like peppering students with a bunch of outreach. I tried to be mindful about what time of the quarter it is, or maybe leading up to stressful times, I try to do more outreach to try to be, you know, show them that I'm available and be available for them. And so it's kind of a balance of mapping that out. So that's why I marked like week 4, week 6. So week 6 was midterms. And, you know, at some point I got tired of taking goofy pictures of myself and like kind of having the anxiety of choosing just the right picture. And so I looked for some memes or some things that they could relate with, and those had equally successful responses. So I was able to find that I could kind of change the outcomes, or not control, but influence the outcomes that I was wanting by keeping the metrics and seeing what was happening. And so, you know, depending on how much of a data person you are, I'm a data person, so I like to like see connections. And so sometimes I'll even track what times of the day I make the phone calls, and when I get the most, you know, answers from students. I'll tell you that post-pandemic, like they answer a lot now because they're at home, and if they're not in a class or they're doing sort of self-paced, self-directed learning, they have a lot more time to answer the phone. And so I found that the phone calls have been really effective during this time that we're all quarantined compared to before. But before, I was kind of checking which days and which times were more successful. And so that was something else that I tracked that was helpful to kind of guide my work.
Thank you to all 4 of you for sharing, you know, just lessons learned and things that you have found most useful, and summarizing that and sharing it out to the webinar attendees. I'm just kind of checking the time. We have a little less than 15 minutes left and do want to leave some time for questions. So we'll briefly share out the resources that we have on the slide. And again, we'll share out this PowerPoint to all of you so you can reference this at a later time. So I'll talk about the first 2, and then Roslyn, if you want to talk about the last one after. These were some things that were shared with our team, and just things that we've been subscribed to. So the first one is Signovine. That's an online texting platform, and it's a company that provides texting services for businesses, particularly like nonprofits that are working with students. I think that's their focus. They've been hosting a number of webinars and just tips that they've been providing through their blog posts. So I put this on here for anyone that's interested in just learning more, or seeing tips on how to communicate with students during the coronavirus. So at your own time, you can check back at that link and read more on their blog posts. The second one is NCAN. So that's the National College Access Network, and they've been putting out a lot of information for members and non-members as well. They've been hosting a number of webinars and just articles that they're sharing. And so I just pulled one from their website, and knowing that, all of us are pivoting or shifting to this remote advising or coaching, at least for the time being, just decided to share this article for you to read more about. And if you go on the NCAN website, there's tons of resources on there, and they do link to external partners. So it's a good place to start if you're just looking for resources and tips.
And yeah, as I've been mentioning Kristen Taylor a lot, this is her contact information, and she is an executive and life coach, student success consultant. She has been incredibly helpful for me in just refining some of my skills and really just channeling them to feel more productive in this remote setting. And I didn't put her Facebook on there, but she has a Facebook page as well. And right now she's offering 2 free sessions for anyone that wants to talk to her and kind of be guided through sort of being a better coach, or I mean, I think even probably personal stuff. I'm not sure, but she said it was okay for me to share that resource right now. And I don't know, maybe some of my colleagues can share, because I know that they've also talked with Kristen, but I have found her to be incredibly helpful. And so I thought sharing her information would be useful. And if you go onto her Facebook page, or if you email her and tell her that you want to take advantage of the 2 hours, you know, it's 2 sessions of an hour each, or 45 minutes that she's providing right now, that might be useful for some.
All right, moving on to questions. This is your time. We're going to leave it open for you to, field the questions over to the chat box or the Q&A box. We have about 10 minutes left to the scheduled webinar, and so we'll kind of wait a few minutes or a minute or two and let you all kind of gather your thoughts and put in your questions in the chat box, and then I will send those over to the panelists as we get them. As we wait for folks to type into the chat box, this is a reminder, thanks Don, that incentive grant funds, so for institutions, Passport campuses that have access to incentive grant funds, this is, and right now is the time for you all with having more flexibility to use the incentive grants to support students with their retention and recruitment. And if you have any questions about that, or facing any challenges with accessing your funds, please contact the WASAC team or Dawn directly. Okay, so I'm not seeing any questions coming in, which is totally fine. I think then if we don't see any comments in the chat or Q&A, panelists, do you have anything else that you'd like to share?
I have one thing, Donna,
Yeah, for sure.
that there's also additional funds earmarked from the CARES Act that have gone directly to institutions for emergency funds. And so it's good for all providers working with students in higher ed to be able to point them to that resource. So each institution has, an X amount of money that students can access right away. And I know that lots of the UW students have been accessing those funds to help defray some costs at this time.
Roslyn, thanks so much for sharing that. Yeah, I think institutions are, as quickly as they can, getting those funds out to students, either directly on their financial aid or in other ways. So again, if you are at an institution that's something and you aren't aware of the CARES Act or how the funds are being distributed, particularly to Passport scholars, this is the time to check in with your leadership to just see how they're handling the distribution of funds. So to wrap things up, thank you all for joining us this afternoon and for fielding over your questions and just responses. Thank you so much to the panelists and the College Success Foundation College Services team for joining us and sharing your expertise and knowledge. These webinars that we host from the Washington Passport Network, the topics all come from you. So if you have a topic idea or just things that you're kind of curious about, please don't hesitate to email our Passport team, passport@collegesuccessfoundation.org, and just let us know. We have plans to set up the calendar of webinar series for next year over this summer. So this is a perfect time to send over your ideas and topics for us to schedule out the next academic year of the webinar schedule. And then if you do have any questions in general about the Passport program and incentive funds and things like that, you can always reach out to the Passport team as well as the WASAC team. Okay. All right. Thank you all. I hope you have a good afternoon. Take care. Stay warm. It's a bit gloomy out there today. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.